You are listening to Contesting Wrestling Minisode 4. It's going to come out on the date that tomorrow is, which is Monday, November 4th.
I guess we also have a new episode coming out Monday, November 4th,
yeah.
or is that...
No, we do. Normally it's main feed episode Monday, premium episode Wednesday, Minisode Friday, but this week it got thrown
Halloween!
off. Yeah, it was Halloween, and life happened. So
it was Halloween Havoc, if you will.
it was. There was Havoc. And if you don't like it, it's a free podcast, so suck it.
He's getting it.
If you were supposed to say that if they were not down with that, you would have 2 words for them.
Oh, I see.
So what are we talking about this week?
So,
we're up to current times. It's kind of one of the points of this mini podcast. A lot has happened this week.
Yeah, so the episode that we are reflecting on was our regular episode 5, which was about the Hulk Hogan versus The Rock match from WrestleMania X8, as well as the Brock Lesnar Goldberg match from WrestleMania XX.
Yeah.
And first thing I wanted to talk about, this has come up a couple of times, and it's going to come up even more when we do the Montreal Screwjob episode, which is forthcoming. I think I tend to give the bookers more credit than others do, and perhaps more than they deserve. Like with the Rock Hogan match, thinking, I think they really did know the crowd was going to react in the way that they did.
Yeah.
Whereas the narrative and what it seems like on the surface is that The Rock and Austin called an audible when they found that the crowd was so heavily
The Rock and Hogan.
The Rock and Hogan called an audible when they found that the crowd was so heavily in favor of Hogan. I'd also like to point out, Evan noted the sort of dissonance of the audience and how that was a kind of cool sound to hear, part of the crowd chanting for Rock, part of them chanting for Hogan. And I'd just like to add to that in the end, they come together in harmony. And by the end, the whole crowd is all on board cheering for Hogan, not unhappy that The Rock won, but having gotten a completely satisfying experience altogether.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things that makes the match so classic is that everybody was satisfied with it towards the end. And unlike some matches, I don't see how that match could have gone wrong at the time. Hogan coming back was such a big deal, and the question was only, does he have a match with Rock or does he have a match with Austin? And in a perfect world, he would have had a match with each of them. They went with Rock first, and then the Austin match became an impossibility. And wrestling was still super, super hot at the time. It hadn't fallen off yet like it was about to in popularity. And also, shortly after this, Hogan couldn't have any more good matches.
Speaking of harmony, I'm pretty sure the new Bailey theme music has the same harmonic structure that you enjoyed in the Rock's theme music, Evan.
Oh, really?
You should
All
look
right.
out for that.
I'll have to take a listen.
Or you can tell me that I'm wrong. I don't understand music nearly as much as I think that I do.
It's probably in the ballpark. If you're hearing that,
I'm a by ear guy,
Oh, I know. I was in a band with you.
And my ear was not very good back then.
Because, in between recording that episode and recording this minisode, we have done a Hulk Hogan 2-parter that's going to be coming at you at the end of 2019.
Including a match with Zeus, which we mentioned on this episode we would have eventually.
So I have more of an understanding of who Hulk Hogan is. And who he became throughout time. And yeah, I don't know. This match is still I went back and watched some YouTube a YouTube version of this match. There was some
highlights.
clips up to kind of remind myself. And I don't think knowing more about wrestling makes me enjoy the match anymore. Because it's not a very, man, what's really weird? Something that I would not have anticipated at the beginning of this podcast is that the more I learn about wrestling and the more I learn about what I enjoy and what I don't enjoy, I'm kind of generally more into the athletic side of it, which is not something I ever would have thought about myself at any point of my life. But this match, I enjoyed it, but it was a very, it's like I remember this being kind of like a slappy match.
Yeah.
A bit. It's more like
A lot of basic strikes.
Yeah, it's a very technically basic match, which is not an inherently bad thing. But I don't know. Yeah, the more I do this, like, especially looking back on like the complaints I had during Bret Owen and stuff like that, I'm kind of more into that side of it now a little bit, like the holds and the reversals and all of this interesting
You're
stuff.
learning the language of wrestling.
I'm learning the language of wrestling, and I also understand that a huge part, probably the most important part, is the character language, and this match was very much about two larger than life characters coming together. And I guess just Hogan is just not that interesting to me.
And I mean, the really important thing in this match, and this is what I emphasize over and over again, isn't just the characters, but the audience, and the audience as a character in themselves. And the story that's being told about how the audience is reacting and how that's changing because of what the wrestlers are doing in the ring.
If this is one of the first times I started to really notice the audience and their reactions and how I should be taking their reactions in along with everything else.
Well, both The Rock and Hogan in their respective careers were very audience-centric. Both of them interacted sometimes seemingly more with the audience than they did with their opponents, but not in a way that you would notice it unless you were looking for it. I was on an indie show once with a guy who was like an old-timer wrestler, and he appealed to the audience way too much to the point where the audience stopped caring. He would literally stand like in the corner of the ring and be like, "Will you applause?" And then they did. And by the fourth time he did that, they didn't, because he wasn't giving him anything. He was just saying, react to me, react to me. It's like, I'm not going to react to you unless you do something.
It's kind of like if you go see a stand-up and they come out and they're like, well, how's New York? Everybody New York? And then everybody cheers. And it's like, does everybody here smoke weed?
Yeah.
And then everybody cheers. And then, who here enjoys the musical stylings of Chuck Mangione? And then obviously everybody would still applaud for that because we all still love Chuck Mangione in 2019.
Go for Chuck.
And then, but after a while, after enough pandering, it would start to be, who here prefers waffles for a breakfast food?
In the language of wrestling, you can only get so many cheap pops.
Yeah, you can say the name of the audience, the town you're in up front to get them paying attention, but then you need to give them some substance once you have their attention.
Evan, several times you've described late 90s WWE as Mountain Dew, which, is apt. Mountain Dew actually has been around for quite a long time, though.
Yes.
It really is more like Surge, which only existed in the late 90s.
That's yeah. I feel like now. I mean, I feel like colloquially, Mountain Dew became a shorthand for extreme.
Those commercials stick out in your mind.
Yeah, where it was just like people with a lot of, piercings, like snowboarding or something
While
like that.
drinking Mountain Dew, which is nearly impossible.
Yeah. It's also, you do not have a lot of energy
the
after
acid reflux, too. And,
yeah, it is not good for you. Funny fact about Mountain Dew, I thought that Mountain Dew brand gamer fuel was just a joke that was on the internet for years. I did not realize they were really coming out with a thing called gamer fuel. I might be like fucking 15 years behind on this point.
It's like one of their energy drinks, I think.
Yeah, that's
that
is. I mean, I like ingesting a lot of caffeine and playing video games like anybody else.
Sure.
But lately I've been doing free squats while playing Dark Souls. And it's great because that way I can hurt emotionally and physically at the same time. It's great.
I was never drinking Mountain Dew and thought, man, this just isn't enough of what it's going for.
Yeah. You were never like, Mountain Dew's a little understated.
Yeah, no, it's like, I like Mountain Dew, but when I pick up a bottle of Mountain Dew, I know exactly what I'm getting, and there's really nothing past it.
I guess there's nothing like that really exists in society anymore, right? I guess, or at least in pop culture. Like, pop culture, I guess, we've gone to the extreme, and we're going beyond the extreme every day. So the idea of a specific brand, like something that in the 90s, like now, looking back on it now, it's like hashtag extreme, kind of like had hashtags existed. So what we call it. I don't know if that really exists now. Like, I guess there's like edgy, But being edgy is kind of just being like an asshole.
I think we've realized as a society that less can be more, and that we need to sort of pull back a little bit to find the sweet spot of what we really like.
Yeah. Well, for decades, if you want to really get into the pop culture analysis of that and where like extreme came from, is that for decades up to the 90s and peaking in almost the mid 2000s, people like comedians and musicians and orators of all types, and really anybody who's producing media, were battling against the censors that had their roots in the early 20th century. You could trace it back to like the Christian Puritans, but really the modern versions, it was like the code of conduct in Hollywood and everything. By like 2003, 2004, almost all of those taboos had been broken to the point where you could really say and do whatever you wanted on almost any stage. Once those restrictions were gone, just trying to break the restrictions that were there stopped being interesting, because you weren't fighting the good fight anymore. You were just being an ass.
Yeah, and I think that's what a lot of comedians these days and other people don't get, where it's like, all right, no one's really trying to censor you by calling you out for saying offensive things or whatnot, for being racist or sexist or homophobic in your comedy. You can say whatever you want.
Sure.
It's just people don't like it. And
Yeah.
it's not interesting to them. And so they don't want to hear it. And, your show might get canceled, not because like they're trying to censor you, because they're trying to shut you up, but because, you're not selling something that anyone wants to buy.
It is truly baffling to me how often you hear about, like, oh, this person has been censored. And it's like, no, this person has a special on Netflix watched by millions of people, and this person continues to be wealthy.
The people who don't like it can be heard,
Yeah.
but they can still do their thing.
Just announced a fucking tour that's like selling out already. Like he's paid no fucking price. You know what I mean? Like it doesn't. It's a ridiculous accusation.
He's gonna do what he's gonna do, and I'm not gonna pay any attention to it.
So a few Hogan / NWO related
You
points.
probably should cut that out, because that's just free advertising for him.
I'll bleep the name.
Because that's the only way people hear about him now, is when people.
Yeah,
like,
true. Yeah. I'll bleep the I'll steal the pinch harmonics from the theme
then
song.
you will actually. Well, you wouldn't be censoring him. You'll be anyway. Whatever.
I mean, same thing. Like I'm gonna bleep when Ben says in the episode that we just recorded, because I will. Yeah, I'll leave all of the foul stuff in. But like that's an action to me. That's I'm not that you shouldn't have said it. I'm glad that you
self-censored the first time.
Yeah.
Said it.
Well, if you
And
really,
then I was like, you know what? Like, I might as well just say it.
Yeah. And
censorship is very misunderstood. And I've always been a very big advocate for free speech in my personal life. Censorship, when it comes to the battles of free speech, is specifically when, like, the government makes it illegal for you to say something. At this point, the government has made it illegal for you to say extremely few things. The rest of it is just up to us to decide what we want to listen to or not, and that's perfectly fine.
I find it's funny that a lot of the people who are critical of this stuff are like anti-socialist, like free market people. It is the free market that is deciding this.
Right.
it is absolutely.
It is corporations not wanting to be associated with someone who says something in particular, who pulls them. It has nothing to do with the government.
Twitter is basically a font of customer feedback for anybody on it, and that's really when people talk about free speech. They're not talking about the First Amendment, which is very specific.
Very specific, yes.
About what it is. They're talking about like a very nebulous concept of free speech that has never been agreed upon at any point in time throughout society.
Now, in the late 90s and the WWF and WWE, as it was called then in the early 2000s, they were very big on like, well, let us have our raunchy show. And there were people trying to stop them from having their raunchy show. And you can go on and on about the people that were trying to stop them. In Mick Foley's second book, he does a long piece on the Parents Television Council, who was trying to get them kicked off of TV just for having a TV show where they do the things that they did. And the arguments were very valid then, because it was very like culturally relevant to have a raunchy show. But that was 20 years ago.
Also, these days, the people keeping them from having a raunchy show are the people like Mattel and the other sponsors and the other companies they're working with who are paying them to not have a raunchy show.
And if you want to see a raunchy show, I could point you to, Game Changer Wrestling that does a lot of blood, or DDT in Japan that does all kinds of stuff.
Beyond, where the ring announcer drops F-bombs.
Yeah, it's whatever you want, you can find it. It's easier to put your stuff out now and find your audience. The reason social media is so negative is because it's finally everybody can have a voice. And if everybody sees everything, you're going to point out what you don't like because that's human nature.
Yeah, people complain about the younger generation complaining too much. And it's, these tools for voicing your concerns about things are brand new. So, of course, we're going to go overboard in complaining about everything. But it's way better than in the past where people just suffered injustices and suffered incompetence and bad products and bad art and all this shit and couldn't say anything about it.
This doesn't even now have anything to do with offending anyone. You can't put out a bad movie anymore and have people see it because the advertising is good. Because it used to be the advertising was good. Nobody would know it was a bad movie for a week or two until the professional critics had their time with it. Now, if you put out a movie that's bad, people know Friday afternoon because people who saw it Friday morning take to the internet and say, this is terrible, don't go see it. It's like you said, it's new tools more than it is a different attitude. It's like, what are you going to say? Man, when we were kids, nobody complained about anything, right? Yeah, the amount of complaining has not actually increased, but now everybody has something they can use to publish.
When we were kids, we would just overshare to each other and not just strangers on the internet, which is great. Oversharing is way better than not ever sharing anything about yourself. And
you know what was really bad? Was Goldberg versus Brock Lesnar from WrestleMania 20.
Okay.
Because this is the mini episode. I could go on about this for hours.
Also, speaking about language policing.
Yeah.
We talked about how the WWE won't let you call the thing a belt. The belt-shaped trophy that is your title.
The championship.
And there's a good reason. So in one of the premium episodes, we talk about the Survivor Series match between the Hart family and Shawn Michaels and the Knights.
Available for $5 a month on Patreon. Thank you very much.
And I wanted to point out that is a specific situation where you have to call the thing that Shawn was carrying around the belt. Because he was not actually the Intercontinental Champion, but he was still carrying around not the championship, the belt.
He was carrying a belt that looked like the Intercontinental Championship, and it was resolved at WrestleMania 10 in a match that was much better than Brock Lesnar versus Bill Goldberg.
And that is Orwellian language and thought policing. That's when you reduce the language such that certain concepts can no longer be expressed. That's a problem.
That is a problem.
Or when you force somebody into a contradictory situation where you're just like, this is a belt, this is not a belt. You have to acknowledge that, right. And then just watch people break as they try to do that because it's shitty. It's like every job I've ever had. At some point, if I'm having issues and your manager, your boss will pull you aside and be like, hey, what's going on? You can really talk to me. And, you cannot, under no circumstances, should you ever be 100% honest with your boss.
No.
Because your boss, even if you think they agree with you and they know what's going on, you can't really just say, I'm just here for the money and I don't give a shit about any of this and I don't think you are good at what you do, but you're the boss because you were just the one willing to do this. And it doesn't entitle you to anything. It doesn't mean that you fucking know what you're talking about. And because I will tell you from experience that if you say it's your boss, it doesn't go well.
No. Even if that's what they're that's what they're trying to get out of you, they're trying to fire you.
Yeah.
So I wanted to correct something I said about Hulk Hogan in WCW. I said that he only put over his friends. He actually really didn't put over his friends that much. If any,
no, he brought in his friends to job to him.
Yeah, he made Kevin Nash, or he didn't make him, but Kevin Nash lost his title to Hogan when Hogan poked him in the chest. It's called the finger poke of doom, and he laid down, and then Hogan pinned him.
It's one of the great moments where you can see WCW starting to fall apart, and it's more than that. The whole context around it is terrible.
Right, Hogan has had the title for years and years. He finally loses it to Goldberg, which was it was, Goldberg was fucking hot at the
Oh,
time.
he absolutely should have lost the title to Goldberg.
That's actually, if we ever wanted to do a whole Goldberg episode, that should be the good match. Or either that or Goldberg Lesnar from
Goldberg DDP
recent.
is known as the best
Goldberg
match he ever had.
Goldberg's had a few good matches. Anyway, Goldberg wins the title from Hogan. And it's like, all right, finally they're going in a different direction. After years and years of Hollywood Hulk Hogan, he finally lost the title. And then within a couple months, or like very soon after.
It was Goldberg had a run, like 7 months or something, but he loses the title to Kevin Nash.
a.k.a. Diesel, a.k.a. Oz, as you've just learned, a.k.a. Vinny Vegas, a.k.a.
They just
Super Shredder.
They just kept. Oh, right. He was Super Shredder because those just they just kept trying to find things that worked and couldn't get around the fact that he's just
Diesel worked, and then he jumped ship to WCW, and it was just Kevin Nash after
and
that.
Kevin Nash worked as Kevin Nash.
So he wins the title from Goldberg, and then the next night on Nitro, I think, right?
So the next night on Nitro, they tell Kevin Nash that there was interference in his match, which helped him win the title, which he said, "Oh no, I didn't want that. I'll give Bill Goldberg a rematch tonight." Goldberg accepts. The police show up to the arena. They take Bill Goldberg aside and say he had been stalking Miss Elizabeth. They pitched it like they were going to arrest him and he was going to be accused of rape. And he said, "No, I'm not doing that angle."
Damn, I didn't even know about
Yeah.
that part.
So they take him into the police station, which was apparently across the street, even though anytime they transported between the two buildings, it took 25 minutes. And finally, they're interrogating Elizabeth, who ends up having a bunch of holes in her story. He's like, he's always at the gym when I'm at the gym. And they're like, he owns the gym that you work out at, Elizabeth. That's why he's there. And so they delay Goldberg, and then Hulk Hogan, who had freshly turned babyface, was like, "Well, I'll wrestle you for the title." And Nash is like, "All right, Hogan, we're going to have our big match." And then they both get into the ring, and Hogan pokes Nash in the chest. Nash falls over. Hogan pins him, and they were all in cahoots the whole time.
And Hogan's the fucking
And Hogan's the
champion
champ
again.
And Hogan's just the champ again. And Nash will say, and he's not completely wrong, it worked because people are still pissed at it. But the problem is it worked, and then people just watched Raw the next week because they didn't want to watch the crap that was on Nitro every week. The terrible storytelling, the cyclical, just Hogan's on top forever and ever and ever.
He did lose that one time to Billy Kidman, too.
He did a few jobs. He lost to Arn Anderson, but you're right. He didn't put over his friends. He put over a few random people just to prove he'd do a job now and again.
And the beginning of the end for WCW, for me, I mean, it took a long time for them to decay past this point, was this match with Sting at Starrcade 97, their big show of the year.
Where he was just fucking for hours and hours and hours.
Not
and
that
WCW
Sting,
was... Oh, there's a different Sting.
Yeah, that's a different Sting.
They had built this incredible story with Sting as like the antidote to the NWO. And for like 2 years they built this, or no, a year,
About a year and a half.
a year and a
About a
half
year
they
and a
built this story, and they finally had the big blow-off match, and they just made it like a homage to the Montreal Screwjob,
Which had happened fairly recently.
and they had Bret Hart as the referee because Bret Hart had come in, and they just did a Screwjob ending, and it was just like, fuck this thing. When it was the moment to have the satisfying conclusion to the story, they did a fuck you finish.
Yeah, they just completely messed it up. That was definitely the beginning of the end. A year later, they did the finger poke of doom, and a year later, their business had dropped unbelievably off.
So,
That whole story
Boy.
just got back from a long vacation because there was a lot to unpack there.
yes.
Oh, man.
We'll do like, I don't know.
There's a book called The Death of WCW that's very interesting and could explain all of that way better than I could.
But I mean, one way to describe, and if you want to be a conspiracy theorist, you could say that, hey, Vince actually sent Hogan and Hall and Nash to WCW to begin with to eat it alive, because the NWO really did eat WCW alive like a cancer. We talked about how the NWO, when it came to the WWE, didn't really work very well, but the very beginning was awesome. There's a promo with Vince McMahon where he's desperate because, is it Austin or The Rock's? Someone's really been giving him a hard time.
I think it was Ric Flair, wasn't it? Was that when Flair was
Flair
like,
became the general
on
manager
SmackDown or something?
Well, anyway,
I can't remember.
Vince is desperate, and he cuts this promo where he's like, I created the WWF. Well, I'm going to destroy my creation. And he turns around, and he has the NWO logo on the back of his chair.
People are like, oh, is that happening?
Yeah, that was awesome.
Indeed. And they brought out Hogan, Hall, and Nash, and it kind of
It
fizzled.
was disappointing, yeah. Also, WCW towards the end was kind of like the Soviet Union after Stalin died, where it's like all these people clamoring for power, and so it's complete chaos because nobody really is in charge.
It's actually a good comparison, and if you watch the WCW shows from '99 and from 2000 rather, you really get like it's just chaos and nobody's getting anything.
One last note on the NWO: the music that Hogan comes out to, the NWO music, is sampled from porn.
Really?
Yes.
Yeah.
Was there a creative decision behind that, or like a
I
reason?
think Nash and Hall were like, wouldn't it be
Oh.
cool if we came out to some porn music?
Hogan didn't come out to the porn music. Hogan came out to fully licensed and paid for Voodoo Child.
Did he at WrestleMania X8?
Yeah, that's not the version that's on the WWE Network.
I
Oh,
gotta be
right,
honest-
right,
Yeah.
right. That's why, yeah.
I think the last porn movie with actually good music came out in 1979. Like I don't.
think it was 70s porn.
Okay, yeah.
Because I mean, it's
yeah.
funky, you know. It's a
Yeah.
lot of wah.
Never heard music that I thought was good in like accompanying a porn movie
Is
made
there
after
even
1980.
music anymore?
No, now definitely
No,
not.
no, I don't pay close enough attention to music in porn.
I mean, I feel like you notice if it's there or not. right?
I
I'm
would-
not-
yeah, I feel like-
that would be.
I guess, yeah.
It's probably distracting. in
Yeah,
most
no,
cases.
exactly. I don't need it. I don't need it there. I'm here for a whole other reason. All right. Final thoughts.
One other thing, we mentioned The Rock's football career, and none of us knew enough about football to actually properly describe that. He went to the University of Miami. He played for the University of Miami Hurricanes, who won the national championship in 1991. But then when he tried to get in the NFL, he went undrafted, and that's when he decided to go into the WWF.
Far better use of his skills, I think.
Certainly.
Okay. This has been Contesting Wrestling.
Wait,
Oh,
sorry.
Nope. Carry on.
One last thing. We said at the
Again?
end of the episode that the next episode would be about Vince McMahon. It won't be. The following one after that, episode 7, will be about Vince McMahon.
Yeah, we got to stop saying like episode numbers and what the next episode's going to be, because this shit winds up airing wildly out of the order in which we record it, which is good. Keeps us on our toes, keeps
Yep.
you on your toes. No idea what's coming on. But if you are listening to this the day it's been released, you should go listen to the new main feed episode where we have Danielle Cummings from the fantastic Heel Marks podcast.
Yeah, we have a great talk with Danielle about women's wrestling. We looked at each other when we were starting this podcast, and it's like, well, we should put women's wrestling in the podcast, and we were like, we should bring an actual woman on to talk about it before we get way into it. So we did, and Danielle's great, and I hope you enjoy that episode very much.
Yeah, we're going to do lots of women's matches in this show and not necessarily have to have a female guest on every time. But I just was really like, why even be a fan of wrestling if you're a woman? Because it seems incredibly insulting. And Danielle actually really helped me understand a lot of that. So it's a good episode. You should go give it a listen. Alrighty, this has been Contesting Wrestling. Thank you very much.